For the past 7 years, I've been obsessively studying success. I've spent thousands of hours researching, going through hundreds of biographies, and more importantly, sitting down one-on-one, asking questions to the people I was dying to get answers from. So for business, I spoke to Bill Gates. For music, Lady Gaga. Science, Jane Goodall. Poetry, Maya Angelou. Quincy Jones, Jessica Alba, Larry King, Steve Wozniak. It's been this unbelievable journey filled with surprising lessons at every turn. And what I want to do with you guys today, since it is the closing day, I really want to go over the origin of how this all got started and share some of the biggest lessons that we can take, not only into our personal lives, but really back into our businesses. So to take you to the start of the journey, I have to take you back 7 years. I was 18 years old, a freshman in college, and I was spending every day lying on my dorm room bed, staring up at the ceiling. And I don't know if you guys have ever gone through the what do I want to do with my life crisis. Actually, so I can get a sense of the room, because I know this is a really professional group, by show of hands, who's gone through, or maybe who's going through, the what do I want to do with my life crisis. And give me full arms. Okay, amazing. We have like 98% of the room, and one person in the back is like, me, I'm going in it. I love you. You're my brother. I feel you. So, I'm going through this what do I want to do with my life crisis, and to understand why I'm going through it, you have to understand that I'm the son of Persian immigrants, which pretty much means I came out of the womb, my mom cradled me in her arms, and then she stamped MD on my ass and sent me on my way. And you think it's funny, but in 3rd grade, I wore scrubs to school for Halloween and thought I was cool. I was that kid growing up. And, in high school, I checked all the boxes. I studied for the SATs. I took all the biology classes. I went to pre-med summer camp. And by the time I get to college, you think it's funny, but how mothers normally put finger paintings on the refrigerator when their kids are young? When I was in kindergarten, my mom put skeleton charts. So, that was my upbringing. And, by the time I get to college, I am the pre-med of pre-meds. But very quickly, I remember lying on my dorm room bed, looking at this towering stack of biology books, feeling like they're sucking the life out of me. And at first, I assume I'm just being lazy. But very quickly, I began to wonder, maybe I'm not on my path. Maybe I'm on a path somebody placed me on and I'm just rolling down. So now not only do I not know what I want to do with my life, I have no idea how all the people who I looked up to, how they did it. How did Bill Gates sell his first piece of software out of his dorm room when nobody knew his name? Or how did Lady Gaga get her first record deal without a single hit under her belt? This is what they don't teach you in school. So I just assumed there had to be an answer out there. So I'm, going to the library and I'm just ripping through business books and biographies and self-help books, assuming there has to be a book with the answer. But eventually, I was left empty-handed. And that's when my naive 18-year-old thinking kicked in, and I thought, well, if no one's written the book I'm dreaming of reading, why not write it myself? I thought it'd be super simple. I would just call up Bill Gates, interview him, interview everybody else, and I'll be done in a few months. That, I assumed, would be the easy part. The hard part, I figured, was getting the money to fund this journey. I was buried in student loan debt. I was all out of bar mitzvah cash. So there had to be a way to make some quick money. So 2 nights before final exams, I'm in the library doing what everyone's doing in the library right before finals. I'm on Facebook. And I'm on Facebook, and I see someone offering free tickets to The Price is Right. And again, so I can get a feel for the room, by the show of hands, who here grew up watching The Price is Right? Give me full arms all the way. Amazing. Okay, we got Bob Barker fans over here. And so I'm in the library, and I see someone offering free tickets to The Price is Right. And at first, I'm going to USC, not too far away from where the show is filming. My first thought is, what if I go on the show and win some money to fund this book? Not my brightest moment. And I know we're in the room with financial professionals, so it's really not my brightest moment. And I realize, it's a stupid idea. I have finals in 2 days. Plus, I'd never seen a full episode of the show before. I seen bits and pieces when I was in 4th grade homesick from school, but I'd never seen a full episode of the show before. I told myself it's a dumb idea and to not think about it, but I don't know if you guys have ever had one of these moments where an idea just keeps clawing itself back into your mind over and over again. So to prove to myself it's a bad idea, I remember sitting in the library. I'm at this little round corner table in the corner of the library, and I open up my spiral notebook, and I write best and worst case scenarios, to prove to myself it's a bad idea. And it's worst case scenarios. Fail finals, get kicked out of pre-med, lose financial aid, mom stops talking to me, no, mom kills me. There's like 20 cons. And the only pro was maybe win enough money to fund this dream. And it felt as if somebody had tied a rope around my gut and was slowly pulling in a direction. So that night, I decided to do the logical thing and pull an all-nighter to study. But I didn't study for finals. I studied how to hack The Price is Right. And I go on the show the next day and execute this ridiculous strategy, and I ended up winning the whole showcase showdown, winning a sailboat, selling the sailboat, and that's how I funded the book. Thank you so much. And it was this unbelievable adventure. Once I have the sailboat money, I have all this money in my hand. I feel like a young, a millionaire. Even though I'm back on my college campus, I'm taking all my friends out to lunch at Chipotle. I'm like, free guacamole for everybody. I'm a billionaire now in my mind. I have all this money, and I decide to take it to go on this adventure. And it takes 2 years to track down Bill Gates. It takes 3 years to track down Lady Gaga. And when I had started this journey, first of all, I had no idea it would take 7 years to come to fruition. And when I had started, there was no part of me that wanted to find that one key to success. We've all seen those business books or those TED Talks, and normally I just roll my eyes. But what ended up happening is that over these 7 years, I started hearing, to me, I don't know if any of you are big music fans, but it was almost like there was a common melody in every single conversation I was having, every interview. And to me, the analogy that came to me is that every single person, doesn't matter if it was Maya Angelou for poetry or Steve Wozniak for computer science, they all treated life and business and success the exact same way. And it was sort of like getting into a nightclub. There's always 3 ways in. So there's the first door, the main entrance, where the line curves around the block, where 99% of people wait in line hoping to get in. That's where people just stand there hoping the bouncer picks them and calls them in. And then there's the second door, the VIP entrance, where the billionaires and celebrities go through. And for some reason, society has this way of making us feel like those are the only 2 ways in. You're either born into it or you wait your turn like everybody else. But what I've learned is that there's always the third door. And it's the entrance where you jump out of line, run down an alley, bang on the door 100 times, crack open the window, go through the kitchen. There's always a way in. And it doesn't matter if that's how Bill Gates sold his first piece of software or how Spielberg became the youngest director in Hollywood history. They all took the third door. Now, if there's one thing that I can really share with you guys today is that when I had started this journey, I had a huge misconception that I didn't know I even had. When I had started this journey, I thought there just had to be an essence of fearlessness in all of these people. You look at Bill Gates or you look at Elon Musk, they had to be fearless. And, something you have to understand about me, when I was young, I was one of the most scared kids you would ever meet. I had a nightlight on until I was 12. Whenever I would go to roller coasters with my friends, I'm always the one in the picture, like screaming like this. And I actually remember the first time I ever felt this. It was, I call it the flinch. And it's almost this internal being inside of me that was one of the biggest obstacles of this whole journey. The first time I remember feeling the flinch, I was in 3rd grade, and I walked into the elementary school cafeteria, and there's, all these big rows of tables. And I'm sitting down there, and, to my left is my friend Ben, who has his, chips and granola bars. And then to my right is Harrison with, the PB&J sandwich with the crust cut off. And then there's me with my big Tupperware of Persian stew, dark green, lamb, red kidney beans. And I think it was warm that day, so when I opened the lid, the smell just combusted in the whole cafeteria. And I remember very vividly all the kids, turning around and pointing and laughing, asking if I had rotten eggs for lunch. And when you're 8 years old, you feel the heat rising in your face. And I remember from that day on, for the rest of the year, keeping my lunch in my backpack and waiting until after school to eat. And when I was young, it started out as my fear of being seen as different. And as I grew older, the flinch really grew with me. My fear of rejection, my fear of failure, my fear of making mistakes. And really, when I had started the journey of writing this book, I didn't understand that half of the battle was trying to get the interviews with Bill Gates. The other half was dealing with my internal flinch. And it doesn't matter if you're starting a business, it doesn't matter if you're chasing a dream, it's dealing with your own flinch that's the hardest part of achieving any dream. And what I learned when I went out to do all these interviews is I assumed what made Bill Gates is that he just doesn't have it. But I actually realized the opposite was true. Not only were all of the people who I interviewed tremendously scared in the beginning, they were terrified the whole way through. So it wasn't fearlessness they achieved. It was courage. And while it sounds similar, the difference is critical. Fearlessness is jumping off of the cliff and not thinking about it. That's idiotic. But courage is acknowledging your fear, analyzing the consequences, and then deciding you still care so much about it, you're going to take one thoughtful step forward anyway. And if there's one thing I can ask you guys today when you leave, I'm sure you learned a tremendous amount. You met incredible people the past couple of days, but there's always going to be moments in your business where you're filled with tremendous fear. Fear is a natural part of the entrepreneurial journey. It's a natural part of any business endeavor. And we have this preconceived notion that fear means that there's something wrong with what you're doing. But what I've learned is that not only is it natural, it's an essential part, because only when you acknowledge your fear can you then decide to take one step forward anyways. Now, I've been on tour the past few months, and the book just came out a few months ago, so I'm really happy about it. My mom is finally talking to me again. So I love my mom. She's the reason I am who I am. And, as the book has taken off, there's been this one question that has sort of felt a little weird, and it was, people have been asking, what's your favorite interview? And when I was young, I was like, that's sort of like the question I would ask my mom, who's your favorite kid? She would always say, I love you all equally. And now I know that's not true. Now that I have my interviews, actually know that's never the truth. You actually have your favorite child, but it's taken me a few months to realize what interview has impacted me the most in hindsight. And it actually wasn't what I was expecting. Because to me, when I had started out, Bill Gates was, my holy grail interview. It was the one that I just assumed, if anybody has the answers, it has to be Bill Gates. Right? What's your name? Naya. Everyone give her some love. Her energy is unbelievable. So I'm thinking exactly what you're thinking. It has to be Bill Gates. But what I was surprised by is, while the interview with Bill unbelievably changed my life, there was only one interview where I can confidently say, I walked in one person and I walked out another. And that was with Quincy Jones. I love the O's over here. This is great. You guys feel it? And with Quincy Jones, I knew what a lot of people know about Quincy Jones. I knew that he's, The best-selling music producer in history. He produced Michael Jackson's Thriller. He produced the best-selling single of all time, We Are the World. I knew that he's been nominated for more Grammys than any music producer in history. I knew he discovered Will Smith and Oprah Winfrey. He's undeniably one of the most important people in the history of entertainment. But when I walked into Quincy Jones's house, I realized I didn't know the half of it. You walk in there, and first of all, he has this round circular living room with golden light coming up the walls. And you walk in there, and I'm sitting down, and this is towards the end of my journey. And I'm sitting down, and in walks in Quincy Jones. He walks in very slowly. He's about 80 years old, and he's in this long velvet blue robe with gold trim at the bottom. And he's like, "Where are you from, my man?" And I'm like, "Oh, hi, Mr. Jones. I'm from Los Angeles." And he's like, "No. I said, where are you from?" And I'm like, "Oh, my family's from Iran." And he's like, "That's what I thought." Then he goes into 30 minutes of stories about his time in Iran, dating a Persian princess, and trying to break the Ayatollah out of prison. And you get sucked into the Quincy Jones vortex, and it is the greatest place on earth. Disney says Disneyland's the greatest place. That's incorrect. It's Quincy Jones's vortex. And you get sucked in there, and 3 hours goes by without noticing. And he's telling stories from the pyramids in Egypt to Rio's Carnival, and my head is spinning. And there were two things Quincy taught me that changed not only what I thought, but how I viewed myself. The first was, and it's really important to understand that I really talked to Quincy after going on the journey. He was one of the last people I spoke to. And he helped me realize that I had spent the past 7 years constantly looking up at the world's richest man, up at the most famous director. And Quincy was trying to show me the value of looking wide, of going to the far corners of the earth and soaking up the knowledge and the wisdom in those cultures, because that's what makes the world so rich. Now, the second thing he taught me changed not only what I thought about myself, but also how I approach business moving forward. And it's what I really want to share with you guys today. So, I'm with Quincy Jones, and you have to understand something else, too. With this journey over the past 7 years, these interviews weren't just siloed conversations. Each interaction that I'm having is sort of taking me to my next adventure. So right before Quincy Jones, there was this pretty disastrous situation with Mark Zuckerberg. And, we can share the story for another time, but I was threatened to go to jail. It was a whole disaster. But what's really important to understand is that I walked in to Quincy Jones's house with tremendous amounts of baggage on my shoulder, feeling completely, depleted, completely dejected. So that's sort of my mood when I'm in there, right? And I get into Quincy Jones's house, and this is about halfway through the conversation, and Quincy's telling me the story of when he was just starting out. He was in the music business, and at the time, the music industry was completely run by the mafia. I had no idea, and Quincy's telling me about all these mobsters he had to deal with to get his contracts. So, oh no is right. And I'm sitting there, and Quincy's explaining to me how he went to go get a music publishing deal with this one music executive, and Quincy walks into the office, and there's the music executive, and on the desk, he slides the contract, and it says that Quincy only gets 1% of his royalties. And the executive who's in the mafia says, "Look, you can ask for whatever you want. You're not getting more than 1%. And behind him are all his cronies. So Quincy doesn't have much of an option. And he essentially gets all of his music stolen from him. And Quincy's, smiling and laughing as he's telling me this, and I can feel my body stiffen as he's talking. And Quincy's, laughing, saying, "I'm still getting my shit back." And I'm like, "That's messed up." And he looks at me, and even I didn't understand why I had that outburst. And it's only now, years later, in hindsight, can I see that all of my pent-up anger and baggage from my experience with Mark Zuckerberg was finally coming out. Hearing a story of another young person getting taken advantage of was making me so angry. And it was as if Quincy knew that about me, because he put his hand on me and he goes, "It's okay, man. It's how you learn." And it felt as if my body had been this overinflated tire and he had just hit the release valve and all this excess pressure was rushing out. And he looked in my eyes and he said, 99% of people treat their mistakes as their biggest enemy. And that's the worst thing you can do. He explained to me that most people hate their failures. They hate their mistakes, and they treat them as their enemy. But it's only when you treat your mistakes as your friends and you cherish your mistakes can you then learn from them. And only then can you grow. And as great as the lesson that was, I'm still in this Quincy Jones vortex and my head is spinning and the conversation keeps going on. And about, I would say an hour later, we're finally wrapping up this interview. And I'm sitting there and I want to give him a hug, I'm so happy. And he's like, he's being so kind to me. And I'm like, "Mr. Jones, I just have to tell you, you really changed who I am and what I want out of my life." And he's like, "How's that?" And I'm like, "You showed me how to be a person of the world." And he's like, "That's so great, man." I'm like, "Yeah, you showed me that you can only grow if you travel." And he goes, "No." He's like, "No. You only grow when you cherish your mistakes." And it was as if he was going to keep saying that until it finally sunk in. And in that moment, it did. I realized that as great as my interview with Bill Gates was, it was actually my mistakes on my way to get to him that changed me most. And in that moment, I had this epiphany that to this day I'll never forget. I realized I had spent my entire journey assuming that the opposite of success is failure. But it wasn't until I was sitting there with Quincy Jones that I realized that success and failure are actually the result of the same thing: trying. And in that moment, I realized that the opposite of success isn't failure. The opposite of success is not trying. And in that moment, I swore to myself that from now on, I would be unattached to succeeding and unattached to failing, and instead, I'll be committed to trying and growing. And that's really what I want to share with you guys back. When you go back home, you go back to your businesses, there's this natural tendency, because we've been raised in this culture where success is applauded, but it wasn't until that meeting with Quincy Jones that I realized if you're attached to success, you'll never be able to grow. Now, what I have been thinking about a lot the past few months, and I'll use this to wrap up because we have a really exciting conversation with Brad in a few minutes. What I'm most excited about, now that the book is done, it's been this 7-year mission. And the whole purpose of this book was I believe that, and I had this idea when I started, that every single person who I spoke to, if they came together, not for press, not to promote anything, but really just share their best wisdom with the next generation, people can do so much more. And now that the book's out, I've been wondering, and asking myself, what the next step is now that the mission is coming to fruition. And there's this one story that keeps coming to mind. And to me, I don't even remember where I read it. It was somewhere during my research. But to me, it actually symbolizes where I feel, the next chapter is. And when I had started writing the book, I assumed the key to the book would be all the practical lessons in there. Whether it's Tim Ferriss's negotiating secrets or Bill Gates's, sales advice, I assumed that would be the key, but it's only now in hindsight can I understand that the soul of this mission is much deeper. And it's really about possibility. I've learned that you can give someone all the best tools and tactics in the world, and their life can still feel stuck. But if you change what someone believes is possible, they'll never be the same. And there was this anecdote that I read about a teacher who was teaching for Teach for America. She was teaching in Baltimore. You're from Baltimore? Let's give her some love from Baltimore. So she's in Baltimore in a really tough part of town and a really rough school. And she's teaching maybe 3rd or 4th grade. And she realizes these kids need some inspiration. So she decides, today instead of doing our math lesson, we're going to all draw pictures of our biggest dream in life. So the teacher passes out sheets of paper and crayons, and all the kids start coloring. And she notices there's one boy in the back who won't pick up a crayon. The teacher's concerned, and she's watching him, and he has this stoic look on his face. And then after about 30 minutes, his eyes light up, and he starts coloring. So the teacher asks everyone to pass in the papers, and the kids go home, and the teacher's going through them. And she sees that the young boy drew a picture of a pizza delivery man. The teacher was really concerned, so she called the mother that night. The mother, though, said she wasn't surprised. The mother explained that the only male figure in his life who isn't on drugs or in jail is his uncle who delivers pizza. And what I learned from that story is that young people will always reach for the highest branch they believe is possible. They will always reach for the highest branch they believe is possible. So it's our jobs, whether it's schools or family or society at large, to illuminate more branches. And that's the mission moving forward. Thank you.